LinkedIn Live with me, Claire Braund, here at Women on Boards. And today we're talking about how you enhance your strategy and governance with Tarlene Shamlian and Kathy Lindsay. So, with the upcoming 2025 federal election, let's not forget, folks, it's on the 3rd of May, directors will be expected to understand the reform agenda of the new government, whoever wins the election, and of course, whoever takes control in the Senate, or not, as the case may be. The agenda is shaped by the political, policy, and economic landscape against a backdrop of very volatile and very ambiguous geopolitical tensions. We've all seen what's coming out of the US recently and the global response. So that is something else that our politicians and our policymakers are going to be navigating. We're talking today to Tarlene Shamlian and Kathy Lindsay from Advisory Street. Advisory Street works with organisations facing public policy and public affairs challenges. Tarlene is an MD of Advisory Street with experience as a trusted advisor to boards, executives and minister, and has served as a non-executive director on a range of government and community organisations. Kathy is a stakeholder public relations and communications advisor and expert here and overseas. So my first question, apart from saying hi, is how did you two meet?
Thank you, Claire, and to Women on Boards. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. Just before I begin, I might also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which Kathy and I are gathered, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and for naturally any First Nations leaders who are joining us here on the WOB chat. So in terms of the way Kathy and I met, Kathy and I met maybe about 8 years ago when Kathy returned from working in Asia, and we realised that we'd actually sort of had very similar backgrounds, but coming to the issues from a very sort of different sort of perspective. But in some ways we were kind of fellow travellers in this context, having worked in government and with organisations in developing their strategies. So we've worked extensively with a lot of ASX and not-for-profit boards in developing and shaping their public policy strategy. And, we've worked with organisations like the AICD, with ASX-listed companies, with large not-for-profits and a range of other parties. We've also actually worked extensively, say, on the Banking Royal Commission in working with various organisations, including ASIC, in really shaping their stakeholder governance and engagement. So we've had a really sort of interesting collaborative working approach, and I've always admired Kathy's sort of background. She's always been in some ways my truth serum in terms of really sort of helping me understand things from a very different perspective. So
Talene and I have quite different backgrounds. I mean, we complement each other, I think, in the way that we approach things. Talene has she comes at problems in a very analytical way, and I have a bit more of the communications and political overlay. So I think that we complement each other very well.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like it. And, when you come at problems from those different perspectives, you can add so much value. It's a bit like diversity. So we've got an election on the 3rd of May, as we've said. How much cut through are you seeing the parties and independent candidates get with various stakeholder groups at the moment?
The balance of campaigning as well as polling continued to shift last week to Labor, but I don't think it's decisive yet. The outcomes will be decided seat by seat, not by a national mood. There has been cut-through is interesting because we all see different things. If we're just looking at the national media, you can have one interpretation. But as we might get into later on, this is a seat-by-seat election, and people are being communicated with in much different ways than traditionally we've seen people being communicated with at election time.
And I might just add to that, Claire, for your audience, I've got two maps on my wall. One is the First Nations map of all the different nations from a First Nations perspective, but the other one, I don't know if the audience can see, but is the electorate mapping. And I look at that like all the time, because as Kathy pointed out, it does come down to seat by seat sort of projections. While there's that national mood that's captured in all of the polling that people might be sort of seeing much more regularly these days in the media, we have to sort of go down to that seat level to really understand that. Having said that, I'd also say that, obviously the two major parties have seen a significant decline in their primary vote over the last decade or two, in terms of, more than 80% of us used to always vote for, the Woolworths and Coles of the political parties. But now it's only probably about a third of the community is voting for the two major parties. And that means that obviously for the crossbenchers and independents and others, there's a whole range of other sort of complexity going on in their seats as well. I'd also just make one small point, is that obviously elections are sometimes seen as a way to kind of protest an incumbent government or even a state government that you're dealing with. And that was certainly, I think, the case in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that protest vote will still be a permanent shift, or whether people will go back to the major parties in their voting patterns.
Yeah, no, I think that's some really good points there. And I think the point about the fact that, and I saw similar stats about 30% Liberal, 30% Labor, and everyone else is voting in that independent space. That is a lot of people. And the other interesting thing, which leads to my next question, is, of course, this is the first time that we as the oldies, and I'm putting myself in the post-50s camp here, we're outnumbered at the ballot box this time. And so how much has social media made election campaigns harder or easier for candidates, given that it's really Gen Z now who are the majority of voters?
Thanks, Claire. I think candidates who effectively harness social media can have a really decisive edge. There's no doubt about that. And the Greens in particular showed that at the last election, particularly in Brisbane. They had two things going for them. They had a very effective social media campaign. They also had a lot of people out at the hustings, people on the ground, reinforcing those messages. The big benefits of social media is being able to segment your market, segment your messages, and do things in a way that that your opponents can't directly challenge, because you're talking directly to your audience, directly to the voters. It's a big shift. It also makes it difficult for people like us to decide and make predictions about what's going to happen during the election campaign, because it's no longer being run through the national media. Not only the Greens, but all the political parties now, and individual candidates are using social media, and each one of them is doing it in their own particular way that suits their policies, their personality, and what they want to achieve.
I'd also say, add to that, is that the government was also very cognizant of the role that social media can play in terms of bringing in influencers during the budget lockup process, which was a first, which also obviously got on the wrong side of the traditional media in terms of, well, who is a journalist, who is media in that context. So certainly the major parties are also looking to that as an advantage in terms of distributing their messages. But we've also seen overnight that both major parties have also introduced policies around housing affordability to people who are first home buyers, whether it's around the way that the interest is deducted, or in terms of the percentage, the deposit that would be contributed to the mortgage. Both major parties are very actively now thinking about the youth vote. As you said, they're going to be a much more dominant cohort than your baby boomers in terms of really shaping the policies to win them over as well.
And those of us with Gen Zers in the house are busily explaining the electoral process, because I think possibly we've failed civics a little bit in our education process. So it is a really fascinating one. Tell me, once we've got a result, how can boards and their directors particularly engage with political and government stakeholders to ensure their voice is heard at the policy table?
That is a great question. We would probably even suggest going before the result has come through. I mean, essentially, boards should be thinking about that today in terms of thinking about the political landscape and how that's going to translate into the policy decisions that might be made. And obviously, policies and regulations change the operating environment in which our organisations exist. And you don't need to be a large ASX company for that to occur. It could even be for the large not-for-profits or a range of other sort of organisations where you have to actively think about the way that government might shape your operating environment. And so from our perspective, we would say that if you're not sort of at the policy table, you're probably going to be eaten on the menu, because it would be a guarantee that your competitors might get in the ear of government and have that influence and potentially shape the regulatory or other sort of funding environment such that it might disadvantage you as an organisation. So boards need to be thinking about this actively now in terms of their strategic thinking, their strategy offsites, or just even trying to think about the risks that might come about through, any potential policy outcomes, and really trying to have that as a deep conversation, putting it on your risk register, but also just including it as part of your board agenda or offsite discussions, because these are big shifts that could happen depending on the outcome of the parliament.
And Claire, we're not just talking about politicians here. There's also senior bureaucrats, agency leaders. They're going to be very important if there's a change of government, during machinery of government changes more broadly, not necessarily at election time. So there's all sorts of people within government that boards should be thinking about, politicians and bureaucrats, and the influences to those people as well. We can make this quite broad when you're thinking about how to influence policy. Industry associations become important to this as well. And as Talene mentioned about the strategy offsites, there's lots of ways that you can engage with government, lots of ways you can engage with politicians. What suits your board? What are the things that you want to talk about, and how is the best way of getting there? In some instances, it's through formal government submissions. Other times, it's direct engagement at meetings. Other times, it's a little bit more indirect at forums and industry associations, or through industry associations. All of these things have to be thought about at a board level.
Really great points. And I've been a huge advocate for industry associations. I think they do a really great job and a really great opportunity, particularly for those organisations that perhaps might be a little more stretched or a little less resourced, quite often those in that charity sector too. This question probably applies more almost to the international space now. There's a lot of political ambiguity about, isn't there? And sort of what is going to be the effect on an organisation's strategy. It's hard to be setting a strategy now, particularly if you're in that, massively caught international supply chain and things. It could change, tomorrow, the next day, the day after. That is really hard now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of our elections have tended to be on domestic issues, but this is probably the first election since the 1960s where, the Vietnam War was such a dominant part of the federal election then. This time around, we're obviously, as you pointed out, we're in the VUCA, the ambiguity of what's taking place is just so large in terms of, obviously the US's approach has been, disrupting the trade relationships and the global world order that's been taking place for the last sort of 70 years. So there are a lot of uncertainties in this space, and I think we as directors need to lean into that by having those deeper relationships with your fellow travellers, with your industry associations, with government, with a whole range of other civil society organisations, to really try to sort of pick up that intel and understand and have our finger on the pulse of the issues that are taking place, because sort of reading about it in the media or from an arm's length perspective is just going to mean that you're going to be on the back foot around these matters, whereas having that direct engagement gives you a lot more of that forward-looking sort of insights that you can bring directly into your board conversations as well.
Yeah, Claire, there's lots of big and unpredictable interactions happening right now. So it's necessary and it's sensible that boards plan their way carefully through all these moving parts. That's going to be different for each board. But there's always opportunities for organisations who take the time to plan their next steps.
So tell me, it is actually quite a risk around performance, and you've mentioned putting it on the risk register. So this really has to be undertaken at board level, these approaches through to government. So it's really not about individuals or individual directors engaging directly with politicians. And that tends to happen sometimes. So how much should it be the organisation doing it, and how much should it be the individual director doing it?
That's a real great question. And to be honest, sometimes that ownership of the relationship might need to be by an individual. For example, the chair. For example, the chair might need to have a very direct relationship with their key regulator. So that if there's something going on in the industry, the chairman of that regulator or, director general, whoever it might be, needs to have a direct line of sight to that chairman and or the CEO. Right. But there are other instances where we would argue that the whole board needs to collectively own that relationship, particularly where it's really strategically important. And maybe it's such that you invite that key stakeholder or minister or someone to join the board, for an hour's session once a year as part of, your sort of lunch or dinner, just to sort of really sort of talk more deeply about certain issues. So it just depends, I guess, on the nature of the matter and how collectively important it is for the board as well.
And relationships are built by individuals, aren't they? That's how we that's how we do our day-to-day interactions. That's how we resonate with other people. It's through individual connections. So once the board has decided its stakeholder engagement strategy and who is responsible for what relationships, there may be opportunities for those personal meetings with politicians and others on an ad hoc basis, or occasional sightings, if you were. So at that time, boards should be upfront and speak to that person who they want to get to know better, find some common ground, know who they are and what's important to them, and make sure that they engage on areas of mutual interest.
Well, Kathy and Tarlene, I could sit and chat about this with you all day. I was a journalist and I love politics, but
yeah,
following
we've spoken about it on other occasions, I do recall. So yes,
we have indeed. Following the 2025 federal election, WOB is hosting a half-day workshop with Tarlene and Kathy in Sydney on the 27th of May. I'm going to be there because I'm pretty excited to hear more about this and how we can, and some of the strategies, in fact, that as a board member we can develop and that we can think about. Some of the insights on navigating the new political landscape, engaging with the government, and managing risks. So this is going to be ideal for directors across all sectors. As a bit of a taster and leading into that, WOB is also holding a series of networking events in conjunction with Women for Election, and they are titled Generation and Gender Impact on Election 2025. They'll be in Canberra, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane and Melbourne. For both the stakeholder workshop and the WOB meets, you can take a look at our website, womenonboards.net. But for now, that's it from me, and thank you both very much to Kathy Lindsay and to Tarlene Shamley.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.